The execution chamber inside San Quentin State Prison was colder than anyone expected. The clock on the wall moved slowly. 11:57 p.m. A guard stood near the steel door with sweat rolling down his neck even though the room felt like ice. Another guard stared at the prisoner strapped to the gurney. The man's chest moved slowly, calmly, too calmly. Outside the chamber, reporters pressed against the glass. Families of victims waited in silence. Then the prison lights flickered. Once, twice, and suddenly, the backup alarm screamed through the hallway. A technician rushed toward the execution room carrying papers in his shaking hands. "Stop everything," he said. The room froze. The prisoner lifted his head slightly. The warden grabbed the documents. His face turned white, because the man scheduled to die that night had just been connected to a hidden murder buried inside San Quentin itself. A murder involving a prison guard. A murder covered up for years. And according to the new evidence, the wrong man might have been executed before. The prisoner slowly smiled. Then he whispered 5 words that chilled the entire room. "I told you to wait." 3 decades earlier, the prison stood above the dark waters of the San Francisco Bay like a fortress built for monsters. San Quentin State Prison was already famous across America. Some called it California's most feared prison. Others called it the last stop before death. Inside its walls lived gang leaders, serial killers, armed robbers, and men who had destroyed entire families with a single decision. The prison smelled like rust, bleach, sweat, and old concrete. Every hallway echoed with metal doors slamming shut. Every corner carried stories nobody wanted to repeat. And deep inside the prison sat the most feared place of all, death row. The inmates there lived in tiny cells behind thick steel bars. Some waited years. Some waited decades. Many lost their minds while waiting for the state to decide whether they would live or die. At night, screams sometimes echoed through the building. Some prisoners talked to themselves. Some punched walls until their hands bled. Some stared silently into darkness for hours. And some became more dangerous than they had ever been outside prison. One of those men was Marcus Reed. By the time he arrived at San Quentin in 1991, newspapers already called him the Freeway Hunter. Police believed he had murdered 4 people during armed robberies across California. The crimes shocked the country because of how random they felt. Gas stations, parking lots, roadside diners, victims chosen almost by accident. Marcus was sentenced to death after one surviving witness pointed directly at him in court. The jury decided in less than 3 hours. Case closed. But the moment Marcus entered San Quentin, strange things began happening around him. The first incident happened during intake. A correctional officer named Daniel Mercer searched Marcus inside a processing room. Mercer had worked at San Quentin for almost 20 years. He had seen gang wars, riots, stabbings, suicides. Nothing surprised him anymore. Until Marcus looked directly at him and said quietly, "You know this place better than they do." Mercer stopped searching him. "What did you say?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I said this prison hides bodies." The room became silent. Another officer laughed nervously, but Mercer did not laugh, because 3 years earlier, a young prison guard had disappeared inside San Quentin, vanished completely. No escape, no body. No answers. The missing guard's name was Thomas Grady. He was 26 years old, newly married, known for treating inmates with respect. Then one night during a shift near the older prison basement tunnels, he disappeared forever. The official story claimed Grady was attacked during a failed escape attempt and somehow thrown into the bay waters outside the prison. But nobody ever found him. No blood. No witnesses. Nothing. The case slowly died. Inside the prison, however, rumors never stopped. Some guards believed Grady discovered corruption. Others believed inmates murdered him. A few whispered something even darker, that prison staff themselves were involved. Mercer hated those rumors. He especially hated hearing them from condemned inmates. So he slammed Marcus against the wall. "You think you're funny?" Marcus barely reacted. "I think somebody here is scared." Mercer punched him in the stomach hard enough to drop him to his knees. But Marcus only laughed softly. That laugh followed Mercer for weeks. Days later, another strange event happened. An inmate housed 2 cells away from Marcus was found dead during morning count. The man's name was Luis Ortega. Officially, guards called it suicide. Bedsheet around the neck. Simple case. But inmates whispered a different story. They claimed Ortega spent the night screaming that someone was watching him through the vents. Even stranger, investigators found a sentence scratched into the concrete wall beside his bunk. "He knows about Grady." Nobody admitted writing it. The message disappeared before sunrise. Mercer personally ordered the wall painted over. But word spread fast through death row. Now inmates whispered about Marcus Reed constantly. Some believed he was dangerous. Others believed he knew secrets hidden inside the prison for years. And then came the riot. It started during lunch inside the adjustment center. 2 rival gang members attacked each other with homemade knives. Within seconds, tables flipped over. Trays crashed across the floor. Blood sprayed across the cafeteria tiles. Guards rushed in screaming orders. Alarms exploded through the building. Inmates attacked anyone near them. One officer lost an eye. Another guard was stabbed in the shoulder. Smoke filled the hallway after someone set fire to mattresses. The entire prison locked down. Mercer and several officers forced inmates against walls while tactical teams stormed the unit. And in the middle of the chaos, Marcus Reed sat perfectly still at his table, watching, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Mercer grabbed him violently. "You planned this." Marcus looked directly at the burning hallway. "No," he said calmly, "but somebody needed the distraction." Mercer felt something cold move through his chest. What distraction? Marcus leaned closer. The tunnel. That single word changed everything. Because beneath San Quentin existed a network of forgotten maintenance tunnels built decades earlier. Most were sealed. Some flooded. Others abandoned completely, at least officially. But after the riot, officers discovered one tunnel door standing open. Inside, investigators found fresh footprints in thick dust. Someone had recently been down there. Very recently. Mercer joined the search team personally. The deeper they walked underground, the colder the air became. Old pipes dripped water from the ceiling. Rats moved through darkness. Flashlights cut through narrow corridors filled with rusted machinery and broken wiring. Then one officer stopped walking. "There's something here." Near the far wall sat a small metal box covered in dirt. Mercer carefully opened it. Inside were old prison documents, photographs, security reports, and one small videotape labeled with a date, October 14th, 1988, the night Thomas Grady disappeared. Mercer's hands trembled because someone had hidden this evidence underground for years. But before he could examine the tape, another officer shouted from deeper inside the tunnel. Mercer ran toward the voice. The flashlight beam landed on something half buried beneath loose concrete. A human skeleton, still wearing pieces of an old correctional officer uniform. The badge number matched Thomas Grady. The missing guard had never left San Quentin. He had died beneath it. And as Mercer stared at the bones in horror, another discovery made his blood run cold. Carved into the tunnel wall, beside the skeleton, were 7 words. Marcus Reed was here before the murder. The tunnel went silent. No one moved. Dust floated through the flashlight beams, while the skeleton of Officer Thomas Grady rested beneath broken concrete, like the prison itself had swallowed him whole. Correctional Officer Daniel Mercer felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs. Marcus Reed was here before the murder. The words carved into the wall looked fresh. Too fresh. One of the younger officers stepped backward slowly. "That's impossible," he whispered. Marcus Reed had officially entered San Quentin in 1991. Thomas Grady disappeared in 1988, 3 years earlier. Mercer stared at the message again, hoping he had read it wrong. But he hadn't. The dates made no sense. And inside prisons, impossible things usually meant somebody was lying. The skeleton was immediately sealed off as a crime scene. Investigators flooded the prison before sunrise. State police arrived. Detectives arrived. Internal affairs arrived. The prison administration panicked. News helicopters circled above San Quentin by morning. America suddenly wanted answers again. How could a prison guard disappear inside one of the most secure prisons in the country? How had his body remained hidden for years? And why was a condemned inmate somehow connected to it? Inside death row, inmates pressed against their bars, listening to guards whisper in the hallway. Some smiled. Some looked nervous. Others stayed completely silent, because many prisoners already understood something the outside world did not. San Quentin was not just a prison. It was its own world, its own government, its own machine, and machines protected themselves. Mercer sat inside an interview room, staring at the old videotape recovered from the tunnel. A technician finally loaded it into an aging television monitor. Static filled the screen. Then, grainy security footage appeared. The date in the corner read, October 14, 1988, 11:43 p.m. The footage showed a lower prison corridor near the old maintenance tunnels. Two guards walked past the camera. Then Officer Thomas Grady appeared alone, young, nervous, looking over his shoulder repeatedly. Mercer leaned closer. Grady stopped near the tunnel entrance and spoke to someone off camera. There was no audio, only moving lips. Then another figure stepped partially into view. The image quality was terrible, dark, blurry. But Mercer instantly recognized the uniform. A correctional officer. Grady suddenly looked terrified. The second guard grabbed him violently. The tape glitched. Static exploded across the screen. When the image returned, Grady was gone. Only the second officer remained standing there, watching the camera. Mercer froze, because even through the distorted image, he recognized the face. It was Captain Harold Vickers, one of the most respected officers in San Quentin history. A man celebrated for stopping riots. A man trusted by governors and prison officials. A man who had retired 5 years earlier with honors. Mercer whispered slowly, "No." The technician replayed the footage. Again and again. Every time, the same face appeared. Captain Vickers. Mercer suddenly remembered something Marcus Reed had once said during intake. This prison hides bodies. At the time, Mercer thought it was a threat. Now it sounded more like a warning. By afternoon, state investigators drove to Vickers' home outside Sacramento. But they arrived too late. The retired captain was gone. His front door stood open. The television still played inside the house. Dinner sat untouched on the table. And in the garage, investigators found blood on the floor beside an empty safe. Harold Vickers had vanished. The story exploded across national television. Reporters called it one of the darkest prison scandals in California history. Former inmates began contacting journalists. Retired guards started refusing interviews. Families of prisoners demanded investigations into old deaths inside San Quentin. And at the center of it all sat Marcus Reed, the man scheduled for execution. The man who somehow knew secrets buried underground. Mercer could not stop thinking about him. So late that night, he walked alone toward death row. The hallway echoed with distant screams and metal doors slamming shut. Some inmates called out insults. Others begged for cigarettes. One man laughed endlessly inside his cell. Mercer ignored them all until he reached Marcus. Marcus sat calmly on his bunk reading an old paperback novel. "You knew about Grady," Mercer said. Marcus slowly closed the book. "I knew somebody buried him." "How?" Marcus looked toward the ceiling. "People talk in prison." "That carving in the tunnel," Mercer snapped. "It says you were there before the murder." Marcus smiled faintly. "Maybe I was." Mercer slammed the bars. "You weren't even in San Quentin yet." Marcus stood slowly and stepped closer. For the first time, Mercer noticed how tired the man looked. Not evil. Not insane. Just tired. "You ever wonder why the witness picked me in court?" Marcus asked quietly. Mercer frowned. "What?" The witness who identified me. Did you ever read the full case? You killed 4 people. That's what they said. Marcus moved closer to the bars. But what if they needed somebody easy to blame? Mercer felt anger rising. You expect me to believe you're innocent. Marcus stared directly into his eyes. I expect you to ask why Captain Vickers visited my trial. Mercer's stomach tightened instantly. How do you know that? Because I saw him. The hallway suddenly felt colder. Marcus continued speaking quietly. Vickers came to see me after sentencing. He asked what I knew about Grady. Mercer's mind raced. What did you tell him? The truth. And what truth is that? Marcus leaned forward. That Grady wasn't the first body hidden under this prison. Mercer felt a chill crawl up his spine. Before he could answer, alarms suddenly exploded through death row. Red emergency lights flashed across the hallway. Guards started shouting, "Lockdown! Lockdown now!" Mercer grabbed his radio. What happened? A panicked voice answered through static. "Officer down in East Block." Then another voice screamed, "Inmate escape attempt." Chaos erupted instantly. Cells slammed shut automatically. Boots thundered through corridors. Mercer ran toward East Block with tactical officers flooding the hallways beside him. Smoke drifted through the prison. Someone had triggered a small fire near the laundry unit. Another distraction. When Mercer reached East Block, he found 2 guards unconscious beside a service hallway. One had blood running from the back of his head. The other struggled to breathe. Who did this? Mercer shouted. The injured guard pointed weakly toward the maintenance stairs. Mercer and several officers rushed downward with weapons drawn. The basement corridors were dark except for emergency lights glowing red against concrete walls. Then they heard footsteps. Fast. Running. Mercer rounded a corner and saw a shadow disappear through a steel doorway. Stop. No answer. The chase continued through old maintenance tunnels beneath the prison. Water splashed beneath their boots. Steam hissed from ancient pipes. Finally, Mercer burst into a larger underground room and stopped cold. The room looked like a hidden archive. Boxes lined the walls. Old files. Photographs. Prison records. Dozens of them. Some dating back 30 years. An officer opened one box. Inside were inmate reports marked closed. But many carried handwritten notes. False suicide. Unauthorized force. Transfer request denied. Mercer realized what he was looking at. Evidence. Years of hidden evidence. Someone inside San Quentin had secretly collected proof of corruption for decades. Then another officer called out from across the room. Sir, you need to see this. Mercer walked over slowly. Pinned against the far wall were photographs of prison staff. Some had red X marks across their faces. Others had dates written underneath. Retired. Dead. Missing. And directly in the center of the wall sat one large photograph. Captain Harold Vickers. Across his face, someone had written one sentence in black marker. He never worked alone. Mercer stared at the message. Then his radio crackled violently. A terrified voice shouted through static. All units respond immediately. Mercer grabbed the radio. What is it? The answer nearly stopped his heart. Marcus Reed is gone. The prison exploded into chaos. Sirens screamed across San Quentin State Prison, while armed officers flooded every hallway. Searchlights swept across the prison yard. Guard towers scanned the outer walls, with rifles pointed into darkness. Every gate locked automatically. Every inmate was forced face down onto concrete floors. And somewhere inside the oldest execution prison in California, Marcus Reed had vanished. Officer Daniel Mercer sprinted back toward death row, with his radio crackling nonstop. How does a death row inmate disappear? One commander shouted. No breach on the outer walls. Check the tunnels again. Mercer already knew the answer. Marcus had not escaped the prison. He had disappeared into it, the same way Thomas Grady disappeared years earlier. Mercer reached Marcus's empty cell and stopped hard. The steel bars remained locked. No damage. No broken hinges. No sign of forced escape. Only one thing looked strange. Marcus's paperback novel still sat on the bunk. Open. Mercer picked it up carefully. Inside the pages was a folded piece of paper. 3 handwritten words. Ask about Hunter. Mercer frowned. Hunter. The name meant nothing to him. But an older officer standing nearby suddenly looked nervous. Hunter, the officer whispered. Mercer turned quickly. What is that? The older guard hesitated. Then he spoke quietly. Elias Hunter. Who's that? The officer swallowed hard. He used to work here. Mercer felt the tension growing instantly. What happened to him? Nobody really knows. The older guard looked around before continuing. Hunter was internal affairs back in the 80s. He started investigating corruption inside San Quentin. Missing evidence. Brutal beatings. Inmates dying under suspicious circumstances. Mercer stared at him. Then what? One day, he disappeared. The hallway became silent again. Another disappearance. Another buried name. Another secret tied to San Quentin. Mercer suddenly understood what Marcus had been trying to say from the beginning. This was bigger than one murder. Much bigger. The prison had been hiding something for decades. Within hours, state investigators reopened old cases connected to San Quentin. Some files had vanished completely. Others contained missing pages. Several inmate deaths, officially ruled suicides, suddenly looked suspicious. And then investigators uncovered the most shocking detail of all. Captain Harold Vickers had quietly overseen many of those cases. The respected prison hero. The decorated officer. The man trusted by California officials. His fingerprints were everywhere. By sunrise, news stations across America covered the scandal nonstop. Former inmates appeared on television, describing hidden beatings beneath the prison. Families demanded justice. Civil rights lawyers called for federal investigations. Some retired officers refused to speak entirely. Others began panicking because they knew what would happen if the truth finally surfaced. Mercer returned underground with a tactical team shortly before dawn. The hidden archive room had changed. Boxes were ripped open. Files scattered everywhere. Someone had searched through the evidence recently. Very recently. Then Mercer noticed fresh footprints leading deeper into the tunnel network. The team followed carefully. The air smelled damp and rotten. Water dripped slowly from rusted pipes overhead. The deeper they walked, the older the prison felt. Like they were moving backward through time itself. Finally, the tunnel opened into a forgotten chamber beneath the prison foundations. And there, sitting calmly beneath a dim maintenance light, was Marcus Reed. He did not run. He did not resist. He simply sat beside an old wooden desk covered with prison documents. Mercer raised his weapon. It's over. Marcus looked strangely peaceful. No, he said quietly. Now it starts. Officers surrounded him instantly. But Mercer noticed something else in the room. A second skeleton, still chained to an old pipe. Mercer's blood ran cold. An investigator stepped closer. The remains wore pieces of an old suit jacket. A rusted badge rested nearby. The badge read, Elias Hunter. The missing internal affairs investigator had been buried beneath the prison too. Mercer stared in horror. How many people died down here? Marcus looked toward the skeleton. Enough to protect the prison. Mercer grabbed him violently. You knew about this the entire time? Marcus nodded slowly. My brother told me. Mercer froze. What? Marcus looked directly at him. My brother was Thomas Grady. The room went silent. For years, the country believed Marcus Reed was a violent robber with no connection to San Quentin. But now the truth crashed into Mercer all at once. Thomas Grady and Marcus Reed shared the same mother. Different last names. Different fathers. Nobody had connected them publicly. Marcus continued quietly. Thomas found something hidden inside the prison. Corruption. Fake reports. Inmate killings covered up as suicides. Mercer's grip weakened. He wanted to expose it. Marcus nodded. Vickers found out. The pieces finally came together. Thomas Grady had discovered evidence of corruption inside San Quentin. Elias Hunter had investigated it. Both disappeared. Both buried beneath the prison. And somehow Marcus Reed had had spent years trying to uncover the truth from inside death row. But why let yourself get sentenced? Mercer asked. Marcus smiled sadly. You think they gave me a choice? Mercer stared at him. Marcus slowly stood. My trial was poisoned before it started. Witnesses changed stories. Evidence disappeared. Vickers made sure I came here. To silence you? Marcus nodded once. He thought death row would bury me forever. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mercer asked the question haunting him most. The murders, the robberies, did you do them? Marcus looked away. I robbed places, he admitted quietly. I was stupid, angry, desperate. Mercer waited. But I didn't kill those people. The answer hung heavily underground. Not innocence. Not complete guilt. Something darker. A man destroyed by crime. Then buried by corruption. Suddenly, a gun clicked behind Mercer. Everyone turned instantly. Captain Harold Vickers stepped from the darkness, holding a revolver. Older now, thinner, but unmistakable. Several officers aimed their weapons immediately. Drop it. Mercer shouted. Vickers laughed weakly. You still don't understand this place. His eyes moved across the underground chamber. This prison survives because people keep secrets. Mercer stepped forward carefully. You killed Grady. Vickers said nothing. You killed Hunter too. Still silence. Then Vickers spoke quietly. Hunter was going to destroy everything. Riots, lawsuits, political disasters, hundreds of violent inmates walking free because of procedural mistakes. His voice hardened. We kept control. You murdered people, Mercer snapped. Vickers suddenly pointed the gun toward Marcus. He should have stayed silent. The tunnel became deadly still. Marcus looked directly at the former captain. You buried my brother under concrete. Vickers' hands trembled slightly now. He should have obeyed orders. Marcus stepped forward slowly. No, he whispered. He should have lived. Gunfire exploded through the chamber. Officers tackled Mercer to the ground. The sound echoed violently through the tunnels. Then silence returned. When the dust settled, Vickers lay against the wall bleeding heavily from his chest. His gun slid across the floor. Marcus stood frozen nearby. For the first time since Mercer met him, the condemned prisoner looked broken. Not dangerous. Not mysterious. Just broken. Vickers coughed weakly. Then he whispered his final words. There are more names. And then he died. The investigation that followed shook America. Federal agents uncovered decades of corruption inside San Quentin. Several former officers were arrested. Old inmate deaths were reopened. Families finally learned what happened to missing loved ones. The prison's reputation changed forever. But the biggest question never disappeared. What about Marcus Reed? Some believed he was a monster hiding behind tragedy. Others believed he was a victim trapped inside a corrupt system. The state eventually suspended his execution indefinitely while investigators reviewed his original murder convictions. Years later, people still argued about him online, in documentaries, and in courtrooms. Was Marcus Reed a killer? Or was he the man who exposed one of America's darkest prison secrets? Nobody fully agreed. But one fact remained impossible to erase. Deep beneath San Quentin, behind layers of concrete and rusted steel, America discovered something far more terrifying than a single murderer. It discovered what happens when the people guarding justice become more dangerous than the criminals themselves.